What I'd like to do very quickly is just say a little bit about the BMA and our holdings in both African and African American art, and then talk a little bit about the accessions process and the opportunities that giving offers people. So I'm starting with this slide because it has the banners free on the front of the museum. Since 2006, both the BMA and the Walters here in Baltimore have been able to be free of charge, free of general admission to the public. So our fabulous collections have been so much more accessible to a broader audience. At the BMA, we have a wide collection and a very deep one, 90,000 objects strong, collected since 1914. So we're coming up on our 100th anniversary. And again, as Myrtis said, our strengths are generally in 19th, 20th, and 21st century art. I'll just mention that our African art collection is truly distinguished. The first exhibition of African art was at the BMA in 1939, a traveling exhibition, and we collect everything from traditional African arts to works by African artists of the 20th and 21st century. So a very broad range of objects, and we're in the process now planning the reinstallation of our African collection. And some of you may have met Nicole Bridges, who was here for a couple of years as our curator and has gone on to the New York Museum. And we're expecting on June 11th our new African curator, Catherine Gunch. So great things are ahead in that area. Our collection of African American art is, I think, also truly distinguished and has a really surprisingly long history. The first exhibition of African American art at the BMA was in 1939. Which is, I would have to say, quite early, and curated by Len Locke. It just doesn't get better than that. So, and it was really the beginning of tremendous interest in this aspect of our collection. Our first acquisition was made in 1942. We concentrate on the best art from Baltimore and beyond. So I'm just starting with some of the best artists, African American artists here in our community. The late Tom Miller, who we have a very fine collection, especially of his works on paper. And on the right, a work on paper by Joyce Scott, an artist in our midst, and whom many of us know and celebrate. The BMA had a solo retrospective for her in the year, I think, 2000, the last time AAM, the American Association of Museums, was in town. Our collection of African American art stretches across time. So in this slide, I'm showing you on the left a wonderful Joshua Johnson portrait of a young child done in Baltimore in the first decade of the 19th century. Joshua Johnson was African American. He painted portraits, and he's been studied by many art historians and well regarded as one of the most important portraitists of his generation. We're lucky to have 5 or 6 portraits by him in our holdings. And this one in particular is my favorite. I love the little red shoes that the boy is wearing. And in the distance at the right, you can see some wonderful architecture, sort of Baltimore row house type homes. So really lovely. In the center, a work by Edmonia Lewis called Night. We purchased this at an auction in England. Edmonia spent a lot of her time. She graduated from Oberlin College very early on in the 1860s. Went abroad and spent most of her life abroad working as a marble sculptor. And so we're thrilled to have this example by her. And I love that I can show you the 2 of these works in our galleries where you can see that they're central to our mission. We have here a little group of school children, eagerly learning about these incredibly successful and important artists. This portrait by Henry Ossawa Tanner from 1897 is a promised gift to the BMA. That is a gift that we will, I'm sure, talk about this more all as we continue, where the family of Eddie and Sylvia Browne purchased this painting and promised to give it to the museum over time. And we're very thrilled by that. Tanner is certainly one of the most important artists of the 19th century period. And I love that this intensely realistic portrait shows his father, who worked in Frederick, Maryland, and Baltimore. So it has not only great artistic value, but true connection to the city. We have made a real effort over the past decade or so to fill in the missing pieces of our African American collection. We had a lot of contemporary work and a lot of very old work, but we had to go back aggressively and try and fill in some of the greatest artists of the 20th century. And we did it sort of in the nick of time 10 years ago. I mean, it sort of was a point at which everything was going up, and we just made it a priority. So on this slide on the left, Ahel Woodruff, painting an artist who spent a lot of his time in France, admired Cézanne, a wonderful artist. On the right, William Johnson. This is a painting that shows a European scene. Ironically, Adelaide Briesken, who was curator at the BMA, was instrumental in several things. First of all, Morgan State having an important series of examples by the artist, and then also in the collection of his estate being given to the National Museum of American Art, now the Smithsonian American Art Museum. Unfortunately, she didn't get one for me. So we went out there and took care of that. I would mention that the BMA has an enormous works on paper collection, 65,000. And this is an incredible gouache by Aaron Douglas. It shows Harriet Tubman. It's related to the murals in New York. We bought that really within the past 10 years, and we were so pleased to get something of this quality and importance. Two works by Rhomere Phere. I'll just mention that those were given to the museum by an anonymous donor in honor of their owner within the past year. So they're part of a series of about a half a dozen prints. So now we have 5 of them, and we just have to go find the 6th. Trust me, the curators will find one. I'll also say, just in post-war African American art, we have incredibly strong holdings. So just 2 examples. On the left, Alma Thomas, and on the right, Glenn Ligon. Both of those will be on view in the contemporary wing when it reopens. And we're really collecting African American art up to the present moment. Our curators are out there and have made, I think, some fantastic choices. Kara Walker on the upper left, a wonderful projection in the new contemporary wing where we've made a black box theater where this can be exhibited most effectively. On the right-hand side, McLean Thomas, a fantastic color photograph. And on the bottom, a wonderful video by Lorna Simpson, which would also be shown in the black box theater. So that's just to sort of give you an idea of the stature of the current collection. And I guess I would say a couple of things. First of all, I think it's important in making gifts of works of art to consider a variety of institutions that already have strong holdings that can be better enhanced by your gifts, institutions that are newer, that need your holdings, that you could really advance astronomically through your gifts. When I look at the BMA, for example, Clarabelle and Etta Cohn, who gave us our entire collection of Matisses, we now have 1,000 of them. You know, we were just a little tiny empty museum, a little regional museum with hardly a collection at all in 1950 when they forked over this huge collection of French art to us, and it transformed the museum. So you should look both for established and for new organizations to give that magic touch to, because we need great examples of African American art everywhere. So one of the questions that Myrtis asked me to cover was, what is the process for something being accepted as a gift if you're alive, which is of course the time when you can control it most. You offer something to a museum like the BMA. In our case, we review it, we consider its condition, its importance to the collection. We always want to be sure when we accept something that it's something we can and will use. Obviously, if it's something like a work on paper, it's fragile, it can't be up all the time, but we want to know that it will be a key part of our program. Then I think you want to make sure that the process is considered and thorough. So in our case, the curators are out in the community constantly. I always say they have sticky fingers. They're going around looking for all these things that they'd like to add. And people offer things. I review them with the curators. We do this as a group. We have serious discussion. The conservators participate. We actually talk about how we will use it. It goes on to the accessions committee, and there are many people on our post-1960 contemporary committee and our pre-1960 committee. And they're members of the community. There are members from our friends groups, which include the Joshua Johnson Council, named after the wonderful portraitist, the group that supports African American art, scholars, collectors, community representatives of all kinds. And that committee assesses it, takes a vote, and makes a recommendation. It goes on either to the executive committee or the full board of the museum. I think it's important to know also the other side of things. There's even a more layered process for anything that's ever considered for de-accessioning, and I think that would be something to look into in any institution you give a gift to. You want to know what are the rules for keeping it in the collection. And in our case, we have a very structured, careful, thoughtful, difficult. It's harder to de-accession something than it is to accession, because we take our ownership of these things very, very seriously. I would just mention promised gifts. I'm involved in this myself right now with my own personal collection, because I'm 63 and my children are in their 20s. And they just sort of roll their eyes about a lot of the things that I have, and like this. And so, as it happens, I have a few works by an American Impressionist, J. Alden Ware, a painting, a pastel, a couple of drawings, and some prints that I wound up having because I wrote a book on him, and his family gave them to me. I always offered them to whatever museum I worked for, then the Metropolitan Museum, but the Met always had so many more, they didn't need them, so they let me keep them. And so now I have all these things. So I thought maybe the BMA would like them. The BMA said they would like to have them. And now I'm going to do a promised gift form, which is sort of, it's interesting being on the other side of the table. And you know, I'm going through that process now. And I did this because I wanted to make room to collect works by living artists, particularly living artists in this city who need, I think, our support and encouragement. And of course, my children are very interested in them because they're kids they know, you know, it's sort of like it's their world, their age, their time. So the final thing I would say is in the case of the works that I got when I was a young person and the ones I'm acquiring now, I've tried very hard to create records. And I think this is where what you were saying is really important. And today we have some wonderful things at our disposal that we didn't have in the past. But some things are so obvious, but you don't do them. So here's the first one. If you're buying a work for a living artist, just tell them they have to sign it. Don't laugh. They don't want to sign it. It'll distract from the composition. Just sign it on the reverse. Then I often ask artists to send me an email. Write to me, why did you make this and how did you make it? One artist said to me, do you think that really makes a difference in what you would buy? I said, sure it does, and it's going to make a difference to the scholars and generations of people who see it later. And I don't do this in a complicated way. I scotch tape it to the back of the work in the frame. There's no way it could become, I mean, it could become separated from it, of course, but this way it's with the work. My children who, you know, are a little distracted will not be able to lose the file. It's there. So the advantage of promise gifts and the advantage of documentation are that's your way of making sure that your legacy, when you pass it on, is complete. People know, and you could even write a little note in the back why you bought it, what moved you to buy it, which actually a lot of art historians will be really happy to know. You could write down everything you know about the person you bought it from. And you know, sometimes you think, oh, well, I'll never forget that. Like when I looked at that J. Alden Ware painting of his sister, which is like a little tiny painting, I said to myself, oh, I know when I bought that. I bought that at Sotheby's for $325 the week before I got married. Now, of course, I'm long since divorced, but I can remember the year and the day I got married, so I knew exactly when I bought it. But if it hadn't happened to correspond with a life event of my own, I would have forgotten. So it's really important to write these things down, make a record, and pass that legacy on. The advantage of promised gifts, in conclusion, I would say are these. You know that the institution you want to give something to wants it and needs it. And very often, if they have already something similar, or it's beyond the scope of their conservation program or exhibition program, an institution can say, you know, this is a great thing. It isn't the right thing for us. Have you considered another institution? So I think that kind of communication, you know it's taken care of, and the institution then knows it doesn't have to go and buy those things because it can anticipate those things coming to it. There are two things that have changed, or I would say one thing that has changed about promised gifts are thanks to Senator Grassley of Iowa, who decided that partial gifts were not a good idea. You used to be able to give parts of a promised gift over time and the value would appreciate. Now, that's no longer the case. Once you start to give partial gifts, that sets the value for the work at that time. So that's a disadvantage that has come into play with the change in tax code. I would just want to alert you to one small issue, not so small really, but a terrible issue for artists, which is that artists are only allowed to deduct the value of the materials of their work in making gifts in their lifetime. And you probably know what they can do in their death, but so artists have different limitations than collectors or dealers or anyone else. So if you are an artist, or you are counseling an artist or have an artist in your family, it would be important to consider very carefully what the unique rules are for artists. And I'm proud to say that at the BMA we have many artists who have given us work, actually, even though there is no deduction. So we feel very lucky that that's the case, but it's a disadvantage. It's hard to, there's so many reasons it's a disadvantage to be an artist. Yeah. You can be so unappreciated, and also the tax code is against you. But anyway, maybe most of us are collectors anyway. Thank you.